So, welcome to part two, where we'll go into a bit more detail. I'll go a bit more quickly so that you can go home or you're home and go back to your families. So, let me start on the second part where we'll look mostly at empty nesters. The nest is empty, the house may be too big, the children are gone, they may have grandchildren for you. So, you know me by now. You know what estate planning is all about. So I'm not going to go through that all again. We know that your situation can change, and what we're going to look at is mostly when your grandparents or youthful retirees waiting to have grandchildren, where you meet the in-laws and future parents of your grandchildren. So let's put them in color. So you have a family here, two sons, two daughters-in-law, lots of grandchildren. But keep in mind that the lady has two children, so they are stepchildren, and this is a typically blended family. So let's have a look at these young retirees. Well, this retiree hasn't started his career yet, really. Um, what you will want to do is you want to look after each other first and make sure that your planning is basically to make sure that your partner or spouse is taken care of when you're not there anymore. First of all, if you have a state pension or if you have an occupational pension plan that is not liable to Belgian inheritance tax, whether it is paid out as a capital or not, there's no Belgian inheritance tax as long as it's the spouse that inherits it or the partner, and as long as it has been funded by an employer. So if you have your own company or you're self-employed and you've built up your own pension, that there will be Belgian inheritance tax on that pension. Now, in Belgium, pension funds on group insurance are uh, built up or meant to be drawn down at the age of at retirement age, and in Belgium, such a pension is taxed at 10%. In other countries, it's often a question, like in the UK, that you can draw down 25%, but that you have to leave the rest invested. If you have money like that, a lot of money like that invested tax efficiently, both for income tax and inheritance tax, and in that situation, a joint life, second death insurance policy can be useful. Now, let's put the umbrella up of life insurance. Um, if you plan to go home and you're just here between retirement and final destination, and you may say, well, we're going back to Ireland in a couple of years' time, but in the meantime, we want to be sure that the inheritance tax is taken care of. A simple solution may be to take out life insurance to cover the Belgian inheritance tax. Of course, you should not take it out on your own life, because if you take out insurance on your life, that is liable to inheritance tax. So you pay inheritance tax on the inheritance tax, and there's less left over. But you should take it out on your partner's life, and he or she should take it out on your life. A life insurance policy of the type joint life second death means that you and your partner take out life insurance, pay the premium, you secure the life of both your lives, and it only pays out upon the second death. That means usually it's uh, um, invested in an insurance wrapper. So the premium that you put in 100,000, 500,000, a million is invested in certain funds, and these go up and down with the market. Upon the first death, there's no inheritance tax. But there is inheritance tax on the second death. That means that between the two deaths, the survivor can redeem the pension. It means that you start with 1 million. You can He or she can then draw down on it for the rest of her life and give it to the children or live from it, and there can be nothing left. So that maybe there is no inheritance tax due really. Inheritance tax is due on the second death, on what is left in the policy. Now, Belgium has understood that there is a problem with these insurance policies, and they say, well, look, inheritance tax is due as well when you take out more than you have put in. In other words, if your wife has been working, has built up a capital and a pension, and takes out a pension of 1 million, she put the money in, and you put in 100,000. Inheritance tax will be due when um, well and one of you dies, then you, as long, well, when both parents are alive, no inheritance tax is due. When one dies, no inheritance tax is due, but as soon as the surviving spouse starts taking drawing money down, that will be deemed to be half from one and half for the other. Or if it's the one who's put in the million, he can say, well, actually, I put in a million, so I can take up a million before paying inheritance tax. Don't want to, I can't be obliged to pay inheritance tax on the money that I put in myself. So joint life second death policies are quite interesting and offer certain solutions. An alternative may be to take out reciprocal life insurance policies. That means that the husband takes out insurance on the wife's life, the wife does does the same, and they invest the two policies in insurance wrappers. One reason to do that is because the tax on securities accounts will be extended to insurance policies like Branch 23, these sort of insurance wrappers, if they are in excess of 1 million. So splitting it in two insurance policies of 800,000 would be tax efficient. If one of them dies, the husband dies in this case, the insurance policy pays, company pays out to the wife, and there's no inheritance tax. We can do the same with gifts. Instead of putting the money in a life insurance policy, you split it 50-50. And the important thing is you cannot do that with community property. So you have to have separate properties and possibly change your marriage contract first if that's worth it. Um, you give 50,000 to your spouse gives 50% to you. The gift tax 3% is only due on 50, not on the total of 100. Each can then invest, for instance, buying shares in a securities account. And upon the first death, the gift reverts to the donor. So I have given 50 to my spouse, she has given me 50. She dies, I get my 50 back, and I have the 50 that she's given me. So I end up with 100 without any inheritance tax. Keep in mind that the survivor has 100, but if you want to make sure that your own family gets something, the 100 will go, if you don't have children, will go to the heirs of the survivor, like in the cases of um, where you have the two spouses don't have children and one has usufruct over the family home, that then goes back to the family of the first deceased. So when you're about to go, you can plan with a will, with gifts, with marriage contracts, but that's mostly to provide for each other before the children. With life insurance, joint life second death is useful for to protect your wealth during your lifetime, and then also protect the survivor. You can make a contract with your heirs nowadays so that you say, well, look, we want you to have this, you want you to have that house, and the children cannot object. They agree to the in this contract, and they can't change anything. A lasting power of attorney is also a good instrument, and that's something that all of you should really seriously consider. If you, I'll get back to that later, but if you at some stage in your life are not able to look after your money anymore, it is good that you have somebody who's your attorney who will take care of you and your money. If you make a will, make sure to give the family home to your spouse or partner. There's no inheritance tax on the family home. So rather than giving just usufruct, give full ownership. That's better. Remember, there's a the usufruct is a poison chalice. You get the use of the house, you get the rent from the house, but you have to pay all the maintenance. If you have user-free, you have the income and you have control and you can sell it. And that's something that is advantageous. You do not need the agreement of the children to sell your own property. Of course, if you give your family home and that's your only wealth, then you could have a problem with the forced heirship rules. So a possibility is to opt for your national law. You can opt, basically, if you have English, if you're English or Scottish, you can opt for English law and avoid the Belgian forced heirship rules. If you have only joint children, you can do the same thing with a marriage contract in that has community. You put everything in community property, and you can decide that the survivor takes all. That does not work with stepchildren, except if the surviving spouse then in the marriage contract has an obligation to agree to an IOU for the value of half of the estate. So it's an IOU with the right to the interest so that the surviving spouse does not have to pay out to the stepchildren in case of the first death. Then, upon the second death, of course, the marriage contract and the assets that are community property will be distributed. Half will be for the family of the surviving spouse, and half will be for the family for the stepchildren. If you leave the family home to each other, you have to keep in mind that the children will then inherit one house from one parent rather than half a house from each parent. There is a way around that, and that's called a bequest in cascade, which means basically that you leave the family home to your spouse, but then say, well, and upon your death, I give it to my children, which means that the surviving spouse has to keep the house or can sell it, but has to keep the money. And that then will be inherited by the children, half from the father and half from the mother. The Romans knew divide and rule, and that's how they had a big empire. The same applies as well in inheritance matters, because inheritance tax is calculated on whatever each individual inherits, not on the total inheritance. By spreading it over as many people as possible, everybody pays the inheritance tax in the lower tax brackets. That could even be the nieces and nephews, as long as they only inherit a small amount. The inheritance tax is only 25%. But you cannot do that in Flanders or Brussels, because Flanders and Brussels have a specific rule that means that they have a group rate. So everything that nieces and nephews inherit is added up, and the inheritance tax is calculated as a group rate, the rate for the that is due by the whole group as a group. So you quickly end up in rates of 65 to 70%. Where it makes us sense is if you is to skip a generation, because the grandchildren pay the same rates. You can as well give them something in your will as well. You could do that directly, but most people don't like that because they don't want children of 18 to inherit money too early. If they are in their 40s and you think, well, why would my children pay inheritance tax first and then leave it to my grandchildren and pay inheritance tax again? Why not give the money directly either to as a sort of college fund or fees for the university to go to university, or you can do it indirectly. Indirectly means that, and we call that a testament de grand-père, that you make a will for your children. You leave everything in, if you have three children, in thirds to your children, but then you say, well, I want you to give um, a third of that to each of your children, so that the children don't inherit anything directly. Everything is inherited by the grandchildren. But the interesting part is that the grandchildren inherit immediately and pay inheritance tax immediately, but the IOU is held by the parents. So basically, the children inherit your estate, can deduct the IOU they owe their children, and minimize the inheritance tax they pay themselves. And it's the grandchildren that pay, even if they get nothing immediately. In Belgium, we do a lot of um, estate planning with gifts, but keep in mind that you only should give when you can, and when you have enough to live for the rest of your life. It can be a cold life. In Belgium, we call it "don't take off your clothes unless until you go to bed." You don't want to do that too early. So give, but keep control and income. That means that you can give the family home, for instance, and keep usufruit. That means that you keep control and you nobody the children can't sell it, and you keep the income. In other words, give bare ownership of property, including shares, but keep usufruit so that you have the income from these shares. Of course, if you give, there's gift tax. Gift tax is really a registration tax. It's in fact optional, not for real property, because you always have to pass before a notary to make a gift of real property. And the rates for direct family, the first 150,000 is taxed at 3%, and then the rates go up to 27%. For others, that could be your brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews. The tax rates go from 10% go up to 40%. So it's not as high as the gift tax, as inheritance tax rate, and sometimes a request, a gift in cascade can be useful to minimize the gift tax rate. If you make a gift before a notary, and that is usually because you can't do any other way, that could be cash share, jewelry, or art. The family pays 3%. That's a bit more in Wallonia, but anybody else will pay 7% or 5.5% in Wallonia, which is quite favorable. And you can, in a will before notary, in a gift before notary, put conditions saying, well, look, I give you a portfolio of securities on a bank account with this bank, but I'll manage it for you and I'll have the income from you for you. Gift tax is not due on hand-to-hand gifts. You may have heard this particular phenomenon. It used to be that companies could issue bearer shares, and these could be handed over, and that was final. Uh, if you want to make a hand gift of cash, you invite your son or daughter to the bank and write a registered letter saying, "Well, I want to give you 1 million in cash." The bank won't be too happy because they'll need special security, but you just take it off your account, push it over the table, and your son or daughter puts it on her account. Um, and that proves the fact that the gift has been made. Bank gift is the same because the hand to hand gift was getting a bit complicated. It's generally accepted that the bank gift works as well. If you want to impose any conditions, for instance, that you have usufruit, you have to make a gift before a Dutch notary. Um, that used to be tax efficient because there's no gift tax in Holland, at least not for people who are not living in Holland. Gifts of overseas property as well are not liable to gift tax in Belgium. Basically, these are tax exempt because there's no document that needs to be registered. With a hand to hand gift or a bank gift, there is no document, there's just a bank statement that says, here's the money. With a gift before Dutch notary, you have a deed that is proving that the gift has been made. And for gifts of real overseas properties, Belgian gift tax is basically not due. The important thing is that if you die within 3 years, inheritance tax will be due on the gift. The only exception is the for the gift of overseas property. But if you have made a gift in the last 3 years before you die, that will be liable to gift tax. Now, the Belgians has this covered as a cheese route. That's a cheesy name that tax lawyers and politicians give to the route of going to the Netherlands. Rather than imposing a tax on the gift, which is a regional matter, the federal government has decided that they would make it obligatory to register any gifts made before an overseas notary. That's not only Holland, but also France, for instance. And they have to be registered, and gift tax will be due as if it was a gift before a Belgian notary. In that situation, Flanders has said they may drop their intention of extending the 3 years to 4 years. We'll have to see if they remember that. Planning with gifts can offer opportunities. Well, as I said before, giving real property but keep the usufruit and 3% of the first 150,000 means that two parents can give to real property to two children worth 150,000 or in total 600,000. And if the house is worth twice that much, they can repeat that every 3 years plus a couple of weeks to give the notary time to register all the documents and leave 3 years between the two gifts. Successive gifts within a period of 3 years are just calculated as on top of each other. So there would be higher gift tax. I'm sure that the notary would not let you do that. If you find that your typical Brussels home has too many stairs and it might be a good idea to sell it and turn it into apartments, and you want to downsize to a flat with a lift, this is an opportunity for planning as well. Basically, you sell the family home, you give cash to the children, you pay 3% gift tax. You don't ask the children to pay that, but you give them the cash to pay the gift tax as well. And then you do what's called a split purchase. The parents buy the usufruct of the flat, the right to live in it, and if they have to go in a home, the right to get the rent, and the children buy bare ownership. When the parents die, the usufruct ends, and automatically the children are the full owners of the property, and they can simply sell it. There's no inheritance tax due at that moment in time. As I mentioned before, reciprocal gifts between partners are taxed at 3% gift tax, but they refer to the donor upon death. So I give to my wife, she gives to me, 100,000 each. Gift tax is due at 3% on one time 100,000 or on the highest of the two. And when she dies, it comes back to me. And I have everything, and the children don't pay inheritance tax. Uh, Sorry, I'm going too fast there. The children will pay inheritance tax. This is just an opportunity to save between each other. Now, if you want to save an inheritance tax, a gift in cascade is possible as well. It means that you can give to your spouse first at 3%, and then you may want to give to a second beneficiary. Now, if that's not a child or a spouse, that will be give if this person were to inherit, for instance, um, a a child of a previous partner. In that case, gift tax inheritance tax would be due at rates of up to 80%. By making gift in cascade, you stay out of the inheritance tax system and you pay not inheritance tax but gift tax. And in that situation, rather than paying 80% inheritance tax, the second beneficiary pays gift tax at 7%. That can be useful, for instance, when the inheritance tax between your spouse who receives it first and the second beneficiary would be very high because they're not related, and the rates would be between 30 and 80%. Now, there are problems with there could be problems with cross-border successions. For instance, if you're domiciled in two countries, if you're an EU official and your spouse is not working, if you have property in another country, if you inherit from a mom in another country, and if you have heirs or beneficiaries abroad, that may all be situations where there may be double taxation, and it's not always evident to avoid double taxation. So if you're domiciled in two countries, well, please don't complicate things. You may think it's clever to pretend you're living in Portugal and not in Belgium to avoid inheritance tax. But if you live here and you die here after being sick for 6 months in Belgium, the taxman will need to be convinced. EU officials pay inheritance tax at home rather at the in the country from where they were recruited. An Italian official who was recruited from Luxembourg will pay inheritance tax in Luxembourg, not in Italy, where it would be cheaper. Um, and his non-working spouse is the same. A working spouse has a career of his or her own and is liable to inheritance tax in Belgium because he or she is not covered by the protocol. If you have property in another country, there's a risk of double taxation. The other country may want to charge inheritance tax, and Belgium charges inheritance tax on your full estate. If you inherit from your mom in Poland, you don't pay inheritance tax. That's the good news. And but if you have heirs abroad, you may want to check if they pay inheritance tax there as well. So, some principles about cross-border successions. Belgium taxes the state of the deceased. For a Belgian resident, that has worldwide assets anywhere in the world. For a non-resident, it's only Belgian real property. That means that if somebody who lives in Belgium inherits from a parent in another country, there will be no Belgian inheritance tax. Now, if you have heirs living in France, Germany, Ireland, Poland, or Spain, you have to know that they also charge inheritance tax when somebody who lives there inherits. Now, usually it's not that bad. For instance, a partner is exempt, and we have a double tax treaty for inheritance tax. We've got two, one with France, one with Sweden, but Sweden doesn't have any inheritance tax, so that has become uh, irrelevant. In Germany, the partner only pays inheritance tax over 500,000, a child over 400,000. In Ireland, the partner is exempt and children only pay over 335,000 euros. In Poland, partner and children are exempt, but anybody else is not exempt. And Spain inverts the rules. Basically, they don't charge on the estate of somebody who lives in Spain, they charge on the heir who lives in the country. Now, if you go and retire in Spain and you don't have any children living in Spain, you are in an optimal situation. There's no inheritance tax in Belgium, and there's no inheritance tax or very little in Spain, except on the real property you have there. If you live in Belgium and you have a child who lives in Spain, inheritance tax will be due in both countries, and that means that you could have double taxation. Fortunately, lots of the regions have given large exemptions for close family members, spouses, and children. But that's mostly the touristy areas. If you don't live in a touristy area, you may want to look and see how you can avoid the inheritance tax or minimize inheritance tax or plan before you move or they move. Now, we said inheritance tax is due on worldwide assets and it's due here in Belgium, but also in the other country. Now, you'll say, but surely there's no problem if there's no inheritance tax in the other country. True, you only pay inheritance tax in Belgium, but for instance, Sweden has no inheritance tax. But then when you inherit, you have to pay the capital gains tax when you sell. So if you inherit the house that your grandparents built, your parents inherited, you inherited. When you sell it, capital gains tax will be due on the difference between the value now and the value at the time that your parents, at the time that your grandparents bought it. France, unlike Belgium, has no inheritance tax between spouses and partners, but upon the second death, inheritance tax will be due on the inheritance of the surviving spouse at the highest rates. Now, France also has bequests and cascades, so you can minimize the or split the inheritance tax in two and pay inheritance tax on two estates. The UK is the same rule. There's no inheritance tax for spouses and partners. And upon the second death, there's a tax exempt band of £325,000 times two gives 650,000. So it minimizes the inheritance tax a lot, but there will still be inheritance tax in Belgium over overseas property. Now let's have a look at how this works in practice. First of all, you've got a family home in Belgium that's worth 1 million. You have a house in the UK that's worth £1 million. For to simplify, we'll assume that the pound is at par with the euro. So upon the first death, everything goes to the spouse, and there's no inheritance tax in the UK. Upon the second death, do children inherit 1 million? They have the nil rate band of 650, and they only pay inheritance tax at 40% on 350, which is 140,000. Upon the first death in Belgium, the family home is exempt when it goes to the spouse, but inheritance tax will be due on the house in the UK. That will be taxed in Belgium, assuming at 30% over 500,000, but you cannot take a tax credit for a tax that you haven't paid in the UK. So in that situation, when the children inherit, they will inherit 1 million in the UK, 1 million in Belgium, and each will pay inheritance tax on 1 million. They pay 235 each, but they can only deduct the 140,000 that they paid in the UK. So there is too much tax that is paid in Belgium on the UK property upon the first death, and you cannot recover that. So if you what solutions are there? Well, what you can do is you can try and spread the inheritance tax on the first death by saying, well, look, I'm giving the family home to my spouse, I'm giving him or her the house in the UK as well, but she has to agree that she owes, let's say, half of 1 million to each of the children. Um, and then the children pay inheritance tax on half a million, and the spouse can deduct that from the value of the house that he or she inherits in the UK. So you effectively spread the inheritance tax and transfer it from the spouse to the children. We can't get that's something that a lot of people forget is it's not because there's no inheritance tax between husband and wife on property in the UK. There is inheritance tax in Belgium on property in the UK. I would then say make a bequest and cascade so that for the family home, the children pay on half each, and for the IOU, they have already paid inheritance tax. If that has been paid out by the parent, they can deduct it from the value of the house in the UK and pay less inheritance tax. The US gives a different difficulty. That is that stocks in US company are taxed even if you're not a US resident or US citizen. US citizens are exempt. Sorry, I hear myself twice. Can somebody mute their? Can somebody? Yeah, okay, I think we're muted. So, yeah, um, if you're a US citizen, you don't pay, no inheritance tax is due on your estate if it's worth less than $11,580,000. If you're not a US citizen and you own property, and property includes houses, but also stocks in US company, they are liable to inheritance tax in the US at 40% over 60,000. So if you have shares or stock options of a US company, your employer, then if that's worth 1 million, you will pay inheritance tax on, um, you will pay $376,000 in inheritance tax. And then if your spouse pays off the inheritance tax and still has these stocks, the inheritance tax will be due again. Now, keep in mind that in Belgium, we have a family home, but inheritance tax will be due on that 1 million. But you can deduct the 376 as a debt of the estate. So you pay tax on 624,000, and over, because over if it's for any euro over 500,000, the inheritance tax is 30%. So you end up paying in total inheritance tax at about 56%. So that's something you have to keep in mind with FATCA and the exchange of information between banks. The IRS has a better idea of what you have. So either sell these or find another vehicle that you can hold these stocks in so that they are not deemed to be in your estate. Put them in a family company and transfer the property of these in the company so that there's no inheritance tax. Now, we're getting towards the end. All I'll say is start planning. Don't put it off. Keep your estate plan up to date. Don't wait too long. No accidents happen. Trams in Belgium are quite vicious. And with all these cyclists, the roads are not getting any safer. You're not getting younger. How's your health? If you have children living abroad, yes, you really do need to plan if they risk paying inheritance tax. Are you planning to move back, take out life insurance? And if you want to give to Belgian real property, that can take time if you have to do it in chunks of over 3 years, because then you need 3, 6, 9 years to arrange that. Please, when you die, don't leave us a mess. Where do we find your will, your last wishes? Where do we find your bank accounts? Where do we find your heirs and beneficiaries if you don't have children or siblings? And we have to look for great grandnieces. Try to make a checklist of your personal assets with your carnet de mariage, bank accounts and insurance policies. Put them all in a file, property deeds as well, and your will, so that you make it easier for somebody who has to take care of everything to take over. Don't forget you have a digital estate, Instagram, bank accounts, eBay, Twitter accounts, etc. All have a certain value, and there are ways you can deal with that to make sure that they are dealt with after your death. Now, if you have passwords, don't keep them in your computer, or don't keep all the information in your computer that you have protected with a password. Keep an envelope somewhere with the password to your computer that people can then use. Don't be afraid to talk about your inheritance, that people know what will happen, that they don't find themselves faced with lots of difficulties and surprises. um, and do give a lasting power of attorney. I've said that before. Um, whatever age you are, it's always good to have somebody to who can take over control, who can be your attorney when you can't take care of yourself anymore because you have dementia, because you have old age. I had a couple of clients who did that at the age of 93 and 84. He was getting too old to look after financial matters. She had starting Parkinson's. And also, if your children are too far away, you can find a way of giving power of attorney to them, but giving power of attorney for simple things to a friend or a neighbor. um, do give a lasting power of attorney, because the alternative is that somebody in the home where you are staying says, well, this person needs a guardian, and there's nothing worse than having guardian imposed, because the guardian will just look after your money and will make sure that you don't spend it too quickly, which means he'll give you a little bit of pocket money and you have to work with that. A power of attorney can is preferably made before a notary. You appoint your attorney or attorneys and your deputy attorneys, who then will take care of the matters, and they will make sure that you have money that you can take care of yourself with the money, and they can also take certain certain decisions about where you're going to be living in a home or a nursing home, and basically make sure that you have rest in that you can rest in peace before you're dead. So again, we'll have a look at the questions, and as I said on the previous section, we'll summarize the questions and answers and publish those on my tax website, taxation.be, where you can read them, and you'll also see other questions for